Don't mind me, I was just reversing the polarity of the neutron flow. So before we get into this, I got a little bit of business first. Shout out to my patron, Nick Hopper, who not only is a very cool person supporting me on Patreon, which you can do as well. Apparently, he also appeared in Doctor Who. No, really. He was in Partners in Crime. He was one of the people shown en masse when the whole thing with the adipose was going on. Like people oh! He was this guy. Thanks, Nick. Classic Who review time, and this will be the first one as selected by my Patreon supporters. They got to vote on what one I was gonna do, and it ended up being Planet of the Spiders, the last story to feature the great Jon Pertwee as the Third Doctor. It's his regeneration story. I should probably pause here right now and point out I will be talking about spoilers. You should know that. And I honestly didn't know what to expect going into this. The last couple of Classic Who stories that I've done, I had certain expectations. I went into Deadly Assassin with expectations based on the fact that most things I had read or heard from people who had seen it, they really liked it. So that set those expectations. When I dealt with the Twin Dilemma, I had expectations based on the fact that a lot of people cited it as one of the worst things Doctor Who ever did. I don't really hear about Planet of the Spiders, like one way or the other. It's just doesn't seem to be a story that comes up in conversation very much, unless you're talking specifically about regeneration stories. And even then, it's not one people dwell on. Like people will much rather talk about Legopolis or War Games or Caves of Androzani, definitely. Nobody seems to really want to talk about Planet of the Spiders. And I didn't know what to make of that. My suspicion was it probably means it's just very meh. Because if it was bad, people would want to talk about it. The same way, people like to talk about stuff like the Twin Dilemma. So I honestly had no expectations. And even having now seen it, I haven't stopped to do research to find out what the general feel from fandom is on this. But it's not great. And unfortunately, it's made worse by the fact that it is Jon Pertwee's last outing as the Doctor. It's a pretty boilerplate Doctor Who story of the time. There's spiders coming from the future to Earth, and they're working with this kind of cult-ish thing, almost, kind of, sort of. Not really a cult, but they've connected with these people who were at a spiritual retreat, and the Doctor has to stop a potential invasion. The spiders also happen to be really big with mind control powers, and they can sort of latch onto people's backs and then make people shoot lasers and all that weird, kind of wonderful, quirky, campy sci-fi stuff. Very pulpy. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that as a story for this era, but you hear that and okay, so it's... Yeah, the title pretty much says it all. I'm basically mostly going to be nitpicking this thing. So if you're somebody who likes this story, I'm going to apologize in advance. But there are a few things that go on here that stand out as really good examples of things that I mean when I criticize some of the jankiness of the production values of Classic Who that people say I just don't get it and I'm being too hard on a low budget for. And I feel like I can better explain with some examples here than possibly anywhere else. Because I really don't think I hold Doctor Who's budgetary restrictions against it as much as some people seem to believe that I do. So let me explain. Let's take the spiders themselves. As far as on a TV budget, decent sized spider thing, they look fine. They're not great. They were never gonna look great, but they look fine. Actually, the great one's not bad at all, mainly because they put it in a terrific setting. So, props to that one. But where they fall down is not on, boy, these spiders don't look real. Where they fall down is the conception of the design, which is they do nothing to distinguish these spiders. They have a crap ton of identical spiders. And all they had to do, just to freshen it up a little bit, was, I don't know, put a Black Widow thing on the back of the Queen. Just because there's specific spiders with agendas and personalities, and good luck telling them apart at all, even on site, because even the voices, I checked this because I found myself going, did they just have the same person do all the voices for the spiders? No, there's actually 3 credited performers for that. But they did the exact same thing to the voice, so they sound incredibly similar. So you can't tell them apart on sight. You can't tell them apart by voice alone. And it's just not possible to get invested with the fact that one of them kind of has her own agenda and maybe is going against the queen when you can't tell the freaking things apart. And that's what I mean when I criticize the design of this. I'm not criticizing the build of the spider. The build of the spider is fine. But there was no thought put into finding a way to just quickly, visually distinguish them. The only way you could tell the queen was to kind of put her on a purple pillow. And she's not even there the whole time. Later on, they have a different spider there. And that's the kind of stuff that drives me nuts. Another good example is the green screen. There's some bad green screen in here. And I'm not holding the fact that the show can't afford to do good green screen, but shouldn't they know that the green screen is bad, that they should write to avoid using it as much as possible? And that's not me saying never set it on an alien world or whatever, but there's a bunch of parts, like especially when Sarah Jane Smith and Lofton first get transported to the other planet, it's a green screen effect, and I don't know why. For the life of me, I cannot possibly think why. Like, just, I know it looks cheap, but just stick them in a friggin' quarry and then pull back to a model shot the way you normally do, because this green screen looks terrible and you should know it looks terrible and there's no reason to use it there. So that's really what I'm getting at when I criticize the production value. Not the limitations, but the fact that they don't work within it. They keep trying to build stuff that they can't realize, or they build something that would have taken virtually no effort or additional thought to just make a little bit better, make a little bit more distinctive, and they just don't do it. Or sometimes they don't do it, and when they don't, that frustrates me. So now that I've gone off on that little rant, let's get off the production values. The whole story is kind of stretched a bit thin. There was no reason for this to be 6 parts. I mean, as far as I'm assuming they had a block how many episodes they were expected to fill during a season, so maybe there was in terms of that kind of obligation, but just narratively speaking, there's no justification for making this 6 parts. The second episode especially, it is this prolonged, pointless chase where first, Lofton runs away, and he steals the doctor's car. So the doctor gets in a different car, or some folks get in a different car, and the doctor chases him in his gyrocopter. But then Lofton abandons the car, and he's like hiding. And then Lofton steals the gyrocopter, and then the doctor chases him in his car, which is in his car that he just got back from Lofton, which now turns out can also fly. And then Lofton's in a boat, and the doctor's chasing him in a hovercraft. Okay, first of all, this is the second episode, so there's no tension to this. Maybe Lofton's gonna get away, but the plot hasn't even kicked in yet. This is literal wheel spinning. The wheels of these cars and of this gyrocopter are just spinning and going nowhere. And it's like this weird James Bond-esque divergence that would have worked if they'd had the budget to do a chase decently, but they don't, and they should know that. Like, episode 2 was painful. And there's also something, like, here's something that bothers me, but I'm gonna let pass because of the time, even though I'm not even sure how okay it was at the time, but this was kind of the practice that went on, which is these very British people passing themselves off as Tibetans. That's a little uncomfortable. I can't in good consciousness not point that out, but at the same time, I'm not really gonna knock the episode for that, because like I said, it was kind of standard practice for the time, so it's just kind of what they did. And before anyone tries to argue with me, oh, he wasn't actually a Tibetan, he was a Time Lord, and the projection wasn't really like it. They were convincingly passing themselves off as Tibetans until it was revealed this guy was a Time Lord. The doctor thought he was, spoke to him in his native language, respecting the customs of that country. It doesn't matter whether he really was or not. We are meant to believe that people believed he was, which means he's supposed to convincingly look like that. And he doesn't. okay? I forgot that Sarah Jane Smith could be very up and down for me from story to story. I love the character overall, but there are sometimes some writers, some stories, they don't know what to do with her besides have her scream for the Doctor, and she does a lot of that in this episode. And it's unfortunate, especially considering I love her debut episode. I love her introduction in The Time Warrior, and I like her in a lot of the other stories. Elizabeth Sladen is wonderful in this character, but sometimes she just gets paired with writers who very clearly don't want to have her do anything other than scream and get rescued. So there's a bit more of that going on than I would care for. I haven't talked about the man himself yet, Jon Pertwee, who is, I mean, he's good. He's good in this part. He's always been good in this part. I think the highlight by far is like at the very end, the moments before the regeneration itself, when he's weak and on the floor and he's talking to Sarah Jane, and you know, just these moments, a tear, Sarah Jane. You know, I had to face my fears. It was more important than, you know, living with these questions and these things. So that those were nice moments. Those were touching moments. Those were well played moments. And they're moments that work in isolation, completely separate from the story and have nothing to do with it. Which I also don't know how much to knock the episode for, because the classic series, when it came to regenerations, usually the regeneration stories weren't about the fact that the Doctor was going to regenerate, which is kind of been more the thing with most of New Who. That's very much what was going on in the Time of the Doctor. That's definitely what was going on in the second half of the End of Time, and in the first half too, to a certain extent. And it's absolutely what was going on in Twice Upon a Time. Classic series didn't really do that. They tended to just have an adventure that the Doctor happened to not live through this time. Well, I mean, you know, he regenerates it and all that. And so this fits in that as far as it goes, but it still feels like a really weak send-off. And I know they were in an unenviable position because, you know, the long-term plan had been for him to regenerate because of a plan enacted by the Master, by Roger Delgado, who unfortunately had passed away before, you know, this whole last season even began shooting. He was in a car accident. So they just didn't have him. And without the Master to like truly pull that together, and I think it probably would have been amazing, but without that, it's just kind of, oh, so this is just the adventure that he didn't survive. Oh, okay. Yeah, I feel like he himself is really the main thing that I can praise. The performances aren't bad, actually, as much, even though, you know, I took some time mocking some of the casting. But the acting's actually all fine. Some of the writing I don't really like, but the acting's all fine, even from the spiders. They're fine, and the weird sort of slightly, you know, regressed humans on the planet, they're fine. The guy who plays Tommy is fine, although I have no idea why that character is there, like, at all. I understand his plot function because he gets the crystal away from Lofton, but like, that's a weird choice. And the fact that he gets smarter doesn't mean anything. It doesn't impact the plot in any meaningful way whatsoever. He could have remained just as stupid and just been infatuated with Sarah Jane, and that would have been plenty of motivation enough for him to go against, you know, the ones that he went against. So I don't understand why he was there in the first place for anything other than plot logistics, and I really don't understand why they went having him go, you know, all flowers for Algernon out of nowhere. So I don't know what the point of him was. But the guy played him fine. Actually, I'd even give props to him. He was he was pretty convincing for somebody who was smarter, but like didn't necessarily have genuine knowledge, just higher intelligence. So he's reading, you know, books of a higher level, but he's still having trouble because he never learned what these words mean. He can now read them, and he can understand the ideas if he knew what the words meant. And, you know, so that's actually even a really kind of cool moment, and it's a concept that I think actually would have a fair amount of mileage in it, but doesn't have anything to do with the story, and it's just more time killing. It's more wheel spinning. It's more, we have to fill 6 episodes for some reason. Yeah, it's just kind of a bummer. The Third Doctor's run, it kind of goes out on a bit of a damp squib. And that's a shame. So I don't know when I'll get back to Third Doctor again. I definitely want to try and find something that is more highly praised. Again, it will be voted on by my Patreon supporters, so they'll get the final say. But I might try and limit the options to stuff that is supposed to be genuinely good, or at least that I've heard is, because I can be contrarian when it comes to this stuff sometimes. I don't mean to be. I really don't, but we'll see. So, God, I think that's about all I've got, really. Planet of the Spiders, it's, as a story completely unto itself, it's okay. It's not particularly well executed in the visual department, aside from the great one in that... Oh, you know what? There is one other thing. Because I got onto the great one again with that throne room. And it's good a visual as it is. And that is a genuinely good visual. And that actually is also occasion where the green screen for the Doctor doesn't even look that bad. I have a real issue with villain plans that basically defeat themselves. I kind of hate that. I hate when the end of the story basically turns out, if we just had stayed home and not bothered trying to stop them, this whole problem would have fixed itself. I could have just stayed at home and had a cup of tea. I kind of hate that because it makes the heroes pointless and ineffectual and not need to be there. Like, to my way of thinking, the only story that I can think of off the top of my head where that actually worked, where the villain's plan actually causes their own defeat when it succeeds, is Raiders of the Lost Ark. And the only reason that works is because the initial idea of maybe no one should be finding this at all, maybe it's meant to be buried, maybe nobody should see what's inside this thing, gets laid throughout the film. So it's an undercurrent that gets paid off, as opposed to, oh no, you don't want to do that, and then they do it like, oh well, you should have listened to me, now you're defeated. Like, just it's irritating. Like, on a fundamental level, I just hate that. So, yeah, I think I do have to land on the side that I didn't really like this. And I'm frustrated by that, because I like Jon Pertwee in this part, but between how much action stuff they give him to do, to the point that he himself even says at one point, this is getting monotonous, and I actually said out loud, yes it is, will you please stop? So, it tries to be a celebration of him by having the chase and showing off the gadgets and like 2 different cars in the gyrocopter and having him do tons of the Venusian Aikido or whatever it was. But none of it's in service of the plot. It all feels crammed in, and it all feels like they do the one thing for a whole stretch of time. Like, that second episode is nothing but chases to show off the gadgets. And then it was episode 4, I think, where it was basically like a long series of him just flipping guys left and right. And that was the episode where he's like, this is getting monotonous. I'm like, yeah, it is. So I just feel like without the ability to pay off the Master in any kind of finality at the time, they just kind of shrugged and went, guess we're doing spiders. And they just crammed in all this stuff that was very much embodiments of his era, but it's not flowing, it's not gelling, nothing's feeding on each other. It's just, here's a chunk of an element from his time, here's another chunk of an element from his time. There's one other moment that I did really, 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 really like, though, which was him saying, basically saying that he gets the TARDIS to the planet, and the TARDIS picks the specific landing spot because it knows better than he does. And of course, he's referring to it as a she, and the Brigadier's like, you're speaking about it as if it's alive. And the Doctor, with that wonderful Jon Pertwee smile, am I? Yes, I suppose I am. Well, oh God, I love that smile. And I don't know if that's the first time that there was implied sentience to the TARDIS. I haven't seen enough of the stuff between like the start of Doctor Who and this episode to know whether or not this is the first time. I think it might be, though. And that's a great moment. And there are good moments. There are good visuals. There are good bits and pieces and performances. But man, it doesn't add up to much. So that's Planet of the Spiders. So did you ever see this? What were your thoughts on it? Whatever they are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Do all that stuff. Like, subscribe, support. I'm on Patreon. I got Twitter. I got a podcast. Links for all that stuff down in the description. And until next time, This council is adjourned.